This is the story of how a discontinued medical treatment involving human growth hormone, given to thousands of children decades ago, accidentally proved that Alzheimer's disease can, under extraordinary circumstances, pass from one human being to another, revealing what scientists now call iatrogenic Alzheimer's disease. Between 1958 and 1985, doctors around the world injected children with a hormone harvested from the pituitary glands of dead people, and what nobody realized at the time was that those injections carried something else along with them, something that would stay hidden for 3 or 4 decades before revealing itself, and something that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Before going any further, I have to be absolutely clear about one thing, because this story has been twisted and sensationalized in ways that frighten people for no reason. Alzheimer's disease is not contagious. You cannot catch it from a spouse, a parent, a friend, or someone you are caring for, and you cannot catch it from a hug, a kiss, a shared meal, or sitting beside someone in a hospital room. Every single scientist involved in this research has stated this directly and forcefully. And what you are about to hear is the story of a medical accident, not a warning about everyday life. Keep that in mind as we go through this, because the facts themselves are remarkable enough without anyone needing to be afraid. Let me take you back to where this all began. In the late 1950s, doctors faced a heartbreaking problem, because children with severe growth hormone deficiency simply were not growing. Some of them would never reach more than 4 feet tall, their bodies unable to produce the hormone they needed to develop normally. At that time, only one source of human growth hormone existed anywhere in the world, and that source was other human beings. Specifically, the pituitary gland, a tiny pea-sized structure tucked at the base of the brain. The only way to obtain this hormone meant removing pituitary glands from the bodies of people who had recently died. Hospital pathologists collected these glands during autopsies, and the scale of what was required is almost difficult to comprehend. To treat a single child for a single year, doctors needed roughly 365 pituitary glands, one for every day of the calendar. The glands then went into enormous batches, sometimes containing material harvested from up to 16,000 different cadavers, before being chemically processed to extract the hormone itself. This program operated on an industrial scale across the globe. In the United States, it ran under the name of the National Hormone and Pituitary Program. Originally founded in 1960 and based at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, directed by Dr. Salvatore Riti. Funding came from what is now the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, part of the National Institutes of Health, and over 250 physicians took part. Across the Atlantic, the United Kingdom version was managed by the Medical Research Council starting in 1959. And over the program's lifetime, approximately 900,000 pituitary glands were collected. France ran its own parallel operation through the Pasteur Institute and the Central Pharmacy of the Paris Hospital Union. By the time it was all over, roughly 27,000 children worldwide had received this treatment through national government programs, with another 10,000 or so receiving commercial versions made by pharmaceutical companies. The country breakdown shows just how widespread this practice became. American children going through the National Hormone and Pituitary Program numbered around 7,700, plus several hundred more through commercial sources. The United Kingdom treated approximately 1,848 children. France treated somewhere between 1,700 and over 5,000 depending on which years you count. While Australia recorded around 660 hormone recipients, Canada had several hundred, and there were also recipients in Israel, New Zealand, and other countries. For the families involved, this treatment felt like a miracle, because children who would have remained tiny their whole lives could finally grow. For the doctors administering it, this was cutting-edge medicine of its day, and nobody, absolutely nobody, suspected what was coming next. Then, in April of 1985, the warning bells started to ring. That month, the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health received reports that 3 young American men, all of them former growth hormone recipients, had died from something called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. CJD is a rapidly fatal brain disease caused by a misfolded protein known as a prion. The type of infectious agent first defined by Nobel laureate Stanley Prusiner, whose groundbreaking research on prion diseases would earn him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1997. CJD typically strikes elderly people, which made finding it in young men almost unheard of. 3 young men, all dead from the same disease, all having received the same childhood treatment. That pattern was impossible to ignore. The FDA acted immediately, halting distribution of cadaver-derived growth hormone in the United States and the United Kingdom and Australia followed within days. On October 18th of 1985, just months after the crisis erupted, the agency approved the first synthetic recombinant growth hormone called protropin, manufactured by Genentech and produced by genetically engineered bacteria with zero risk of contamination from human tissue. Protropin was actually the first biotech drug ever manufactured and marketed by a biotechnology company, marking the start of an entirely new era of medicine. The damage from the old era, though, was just starting to surface. France handled the crisis very differently. Despite an official ban issued in June of 1985, the central pharmacy of the Paris Hospital Union continued distributing 20,000 ampules of the contaminated hormone, all the way until February of 1986, reportedly to avoid destroying about 5.5 million francs worth of stock. That single decision would haunt the country for decades. As of January 2024, the worldwide death toll from contaminated growth hormone stood at 254 confirmed cases of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and France carried by far the heaviest burden, with between 119 and 122 confirmed deaths out of roughly 1,700 to 1,880 recipients. The United Kingdom recorded 81 cases out of approximately 1,848 recipients, while the United States saw 36 cases out of around 7,700 recipients. The lower American rate is credited to a 1977 purification upgrade that dramatically reduced prion contamination. And tellingly, every single one of those 36 American cases began treatment before 1977. Here is one of the most disturbing aspects of this disease. The incubation periods have been extraordinarily long, with some cases appearing 5 years after exposure and others taking 40 years or more. The longest confirmed American case took 48.3 years from injection to symptoms, meaning nearly half a century of carrying something inside your body before it strikes. In France, the scandal eventually moved into the criminal courts. 6 doctors and pharmacists, including Jean-Claude Job, the pediatrician who headed pituitary gland collection, and Fernand Drey, who purified the material at the Pasteur Institute, faced charges of involuntary homicide, aggravated fraud, and causing unintentional injury. The criminal investigation dragged on for 17 years before the trial finally opened on February 6th of 2008 and lasted 4 months. On January 14th of 2009, every one of the 6 defendants walked free, with the court ruling it was impossible to be certain they had known about the contamination risks. During that trial, the Nobel laureate virologist Luc Montagnier offered a chilling warning. His exact words were, quote, "I fear we may have not learned any lessons from this case and will face other and bigger public health scandals in the absence of adequate scientific and medical caution." Montagnier noted that he himself had recommended precautions back in 1980, but, as he put it, was ignored. The British legal story took a different path. In July of 1996, Mr. Justice Moreland ruled that the Medical Research Council and the Department of Health had been negligent in failing to act on warnings that scientists had issued back in October of 1976 about CJD contamination risk. That ruling made it the first pharmaceutical compensation claim ever to succeed in British courts, and the law firm Irwin Mitchell eventually recovered over £20 million in settlements. The court found that the Department of Health's processing committee had become aware of CJD concerns in 1976 and 1977, but had failed to communicate any of this to the clinical committee actually prescribing the treatment to children. One member of Parliament put it bluntly in the House of Commons, stating, quote, "Ward, there has without doubt been a cover-up as to the extent of knowledge." Despite repeated calls from victims and their families, no full public inquiry was ever ordered in the United Kingdom. So the world had a new disaster on its hands, with hundreds of young people dying of CJD from contaminated injections they had received as children. That alone would have been one of the worst medical scandals of the 20th century. The truth, though, was that this was only half the story, because some of the people who received that contaminated growth hormone did not develop CJD at all. They developed something else entirely, and it would take another 30 years before anyone figured out what. In September of 2015, a research team at University College London published a paper in the journal Nature that stunned the medical community. The team was led by Dr. Zane John McTainay and Professor John Colling of the Medical Research Council Prion Unit, and they had been conducting routine autopsies on 8 people, aged between 36 and 51, who had died of CJD after receiving growth hormone treatment as children. What they found was something they had never expected. 4 of those 8 patients carried moderate to severe deposits of a protein called amyloid beta in their brain tissue and blood vessels. and 6 of the 8 showed at least some amyloid beta pathology. Here is why that matters. Amyloid beta is the hallmark protein of Alzheimer's disease, and finding it in elderly Alzheimer's patients is normal, but finding it in young people in their 30s and 40s who had no genetic predisposition was extraordinary. None of them carried the APOE4 risk variant of the APOE gene, none had known Alzheimer's mutations, and a control group of 116 patients with other prion diseases showed minimal or no comparable pathology. The implication was breathtaking. The contaminated growth hormone batches appeared to have contained not just CJD prions but also amyloid beta seeds, and those seeds had taken root in the recipients' brains. Professor Collins described the discovery this way, quote, what we find, very much to our surprise, is that of these 8 patients, 4 of them are really quite significant in severe deposition of Alzheimer amyloid protein in their brain. Finding these proteins in the brains of dead people was one thing. Proving the growth hormone was actually responsible was another challenge entirely. 3 years later, in December of 2018, the same research team produced what scientists like to call the smoking gun. Dr. Sylvia Purro, working alongside Professor Collinga, obtained archived vials of the original cadaver-derived growth hormone, decades-old vials drawn from the same batches given to patients who later developed CJD. They analyzed those vials biochemically and found exactly what they suspected. The vials contained substantial levels of amyloid beta peptides and tau protein, another protein closely associated with Alzheimer's disease and the formation of neurofibrillary tangles. They then took it one step further. The team injected the archived growth hormone into laboratory mice, and the mice developed amyloid beta pathology in their brains, with the contamination concentrated in batches prepared using a specific method called the Hartree-modified Wilhelmi preparation. The case was building, but scientists still needed to find living patients, real human beings who had received this treatment as children and were now developing Alzheimer's disease decades later. That paper landed on January 29th of 2024, published in Nature Medicine by Dr. Gargi Banerjee, Professor Colling, and their colleagues. What it described was the first reported cases of what doctors are now calling iatrogenic Alzheimer's disease, with iatrogenic simply meaning caused by medical treatment. The team had tracked 8 individuals referred to the UK National Prion Clinic between 2017 and 2022. All of them treated with cadaver-derived growth hormone in childhood, all confirmed not to have CJD. Of those 8, 5 met the diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's disease, 1 had mild cognitive impairment, 1 had subjective cognitive symptoms, and 1 was asymptomatic but already showed Alzheimer's biomarkers in their brain. Their ages at symptom onset ranged from 38 to 55, extraordinarily young for Alzheimer's, and the latency from their original growth hormone treatment to the appearance of symptoms ran 3 to 4 decades. Genetic causes were excluded in 5 of the 8 cases, and every one of them had received the contaminated Hartree-modified preparation. The paper closed with a sentence that changed how scientists think about this disease, stating, quote, Alzheimer's disease should now be recognized as a potentially transmissible disorder. Not everyone in the scientific community accepted these findings without pushback. In October of 2024, a group of prominent American researchers, including Dr. Avi Nath of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. David Holtzman of Washington University, and Dr. Bruce Miller of the University of California, San Francisco, published a formal rebuttal in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia. Their argument was that most of the cases lacked convincing tau pathology, which is essential for a complete Alzheimer's diagnosis. Dr. Miller put it this way, quote, the criteria for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease requires the presence of amyloid and tau, and this diagnosis can be made with autopsy material or clinically. The cases in this report, with one exception, lack that evidence. The Collins team needed to answer that criticism, and in March of 2026, just last month, they did exactly that. Published online on March 30th of 2026 in the journal JAMA Neurology, the team presented autopsy results from a male growth hormone recipient who had developed dementia at age 47 and died at age 57. The findings were, in the editor's word, unequivocal. He carried extensive amyloid beta deposits, severe cerebral amyloid angiopathy, and extensive tau neurofibrillary tangles. In technical terms, his brain showed grade A3B3C3 Alzheimer's pathology, which is the highest possible level. He had no genetic predisposition, carried no risk variants, and the disease in his brain was, by every measurable standard, full Alzheimer's disease. It had been caused by injections he received as a child. 3 additional growth hormone recipients showed early-onset dementia with distinctive language impairment, with onset ages between 47 and 60. In an editorial accompanying that paper, Dr. Brian Appleby and Dr. Mark Cohen of Case Western Reserve University called these findings the strongest confirmation yet of Alzheimer's diagnosis in this cohort. They added something equally important, writing, quote, "These cases do not suggest that AD is contagious or transmissible in any current medical scenario." That brings me back to where I started this video, because this is the most important thing for you to take away from everything I have just told you. Alzheimer's disease is not contagious, and the scientists who made this discovery have been absolutely emphatic on this point. Professor Colling himself stated, quote, "There is no suggestion whatsoever that Alzheimer's disease can be transmitted between individuals during activities of daily life or routine medical care. The patients we have described were given a specific and long discontinued medical treatment, which involved injecting patients with material now known to have been contaminated with disease-related proteins." In another interview, his words were even simpler, quote, "We are not suggesting for a moment that you can catch Alzheimer's disease." Christopher Weber of the Alzheimer's Association in the United States offered this reassurance, quote, "Alzheimer's disease is not contagious. You can't catch Alzheimer's by taking care of someone with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease is not transmissible through the air, or by touching or being near someone with Alzheimer's." Dr. Richard Oakley of the Alzheimer's Society in the United Kingdom added, quote, "There are no safety concerns with today's treatments as they were developed to minimize the risk of any transmissible diseases. Crucially, there is also no evidence that Alzheimer's disease can be transmitted in the context of daily life activities or routine care." Why does this story matter at all then, if it cannot happen to ordinary people in ordinary situations? It matters because it changes how we understand Alzheimer's disease at the molecular level. For decades, scientists have wondered whether amyloid beta might behave somewhat like a prion, the misfolded protein that causes mad cow disease and CJD. Prions have an unusual property because they can take normal proteins and template them into the same misfolded shape, which then templates more proteins in a kind of biological chain reaction. The growth hormone discovery suggests that under extraordinary circumstances, amyloid beta can do something similar, and scientists describe it as prion-like, sharing the seeding mechanism but lacking the same degree of person-to-person transmissibility. This understanding has profound implications for modern treatment approaches. Today's FDA-approved anti-amyloid therapies like lecanemab, Leqembi, and donanemab work by targeting and clearing amyloid beta deposits from the brain, and understanding the prion-like seeding mechanism helps explain why early intervention with these treatments may be crucial for seniors at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. This discovery has prompted scientists to look more carefully at other historical medical procedures. Over 50 cases of iatrogenic cerebral amyloid angiopathy have now been published worldwide, many of them linked to cadaveric dura mater grafts, which are tissues used to repair the lining of the brain during neurosurgery. These were used extensively in Japan all the way until 1997. Researchers have also examined whether neurosurgical instruments could potentially harbor amyloid beta seeds, and large studies have looked at blood transfusion as a possible route. The good news came from a major study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2016, which examined 1.47 million transfusion recipients and found no evidence of Alzheimer's transmission through blood. Since the original 2024 paper was published, 14 additional growth hormone recipients have been referred to the UK National Prion Clinic. The cohort of surviving British recipients is now reaching their 50s and 60s, the age range where iatrogenic Alzheimer's would be expected to appear given the 30 to 40-year latency period. Roughly two-thirds of the 1,848 UK recipients, which works out to about 1,200 people, received the contaminated preparation, and researchers expect the number of cases to grow. Let me end where I began. This is the story of how a medical treatment given decades ago to thousands of children inadvertently revealed something profound about the nature of Alzheimer's disease. 3 pillars of evidence now support this discovery: the 2015 finding of amyloid beta in young CJD victims, the 2018 confirmation that archived hormone vials still contained the seeds and could transmit the pathology to mice, and the 2024 to 2026 clinical and autopsy-confirmed cases in living patients. The March 2026 autopsy, showing the highest possible grade of Alzheimer's pathology in a man with no genetic risk factors whatsoever, stands as the strongest evidence yet. The public health message has not changed and will not change. You cannot catch Alzheimer's from your spouse, you cannot catch it from your parents, and you cannot catch it from caring for someone you love. There is no reason to fear the people in your life who are living with this disease, and there is no reason to fear that you might pass it on to anyone else. What this story tells us is not that Alzheimer's is contagious, but that the proteins involved in this disease behave in ways scientists are still working to fully understand. This discovery has prompted scientists to look more carefully at other historical medical procedures. Over 50 cases of iatrogenic cerebral amyloid angiopathy. What was being given to them, their parents could not have known, and even the doctors administering the treatment could not have known. What we owe them now, and what we owe everyone affected by Alzheimer's disease, is to keep asking questions, keep doing the science, and keep telling the truth, even when the truth is complicated, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it forces us to rewrite the textbooks. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you understand this important story, please share it with someone who might benefit from knowing the facts. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.